Hey gang, today we're going to talk about the revolutions of 1848. Earlier today in class we talked about the age of Metternich and the two competing political philosophies that emerged following the Congress of Vienna in 1815. So today we're going to talk just about the revolutions that occurred, the liberal revolutions that occurred in 1848, and a couple of the results of them. So first of all, what caused these liberal revolutions that rocked Europe, that really went against the old regime, the old order, and conservative Europe? Well, the first thing that caused it was plain old liberalism. If you'll think back to what your notes tell you about liberalism, it's the ideal that people essentially should have certain freedoms and certain rights. This idea spread over and really came to a head in 1848 because in France, this is where revolt started, had their own revolution because of a denial of rights, and so those spread. Amongst those very important liberal reforms that was desired was in France especially was the desire for universal male suffrage. That's the idea that all men should vote, not simply those that had land or property, as some Republicans we'll talk about in just a second thought, but they believed that everyone should have the right to vote, all men, not women, but all men. Also spurring this was the era of nationalism. Nationalism is obviously pride in one's country and a sense of national unity and pride in your culture and your heritage. Well, this really got a boost from Greece because Greece led a nationalist revolt in 1827 and was successful in overthrowing the Ottoman government and the Ottoman Empire from capturing them. If you think back to Eugene Delacroix, the massacre at Chios, this illustrates, or was illustrated, the event in the Greek Revolution and their push for independence. Also important to note here is that Britain, France, and Russia, who had to put down revolutions of their own, Britain, France, and Russia, supported Greek independence. Now, they supported Greek independence because it weakened the Ottomans, not because of any sense of strong nationalism. Political and economic causes of this were, one, people wanted free trade and free government. What we see are, once again, politics and economics go hand in hand. People who are wealthy merchants say, hey, I have a lot of money and I can do what I want with my money, so why can't I say that in government? And so what emerged were two kind of significant or unique groups here. One were Republicans who wanted to form Republican forms of government, just like we have here in the United States. And the other, and they, by the way, wanted to elect representatives to run our government, run their governments, similar to how we do here in the United States. And there were others who were more democratic. Now, the Republicans typically, and this is not a strict label that they would have, but people who were in favor of the Republican regime or standard believe that there should be some land ownership and property ownership requirements to vote, or wealth ownership, wealth requirements. On the other hand, there were groups called Democrats or radicals who believed in that universal male suffrage, which was very radical at the time. So where did these revolutions take place? There was a revolution in France overthrowing the regime of a guy named Louis Philippe. Charles X became absolute monarch and governed, he was part of the Bourbon line, governed France until 1813. Well, Louis Philippe, who was his cousin, was brought in as a constitutional monarch. Well, people got tired of Louis Philippe and the constitutional monarchy, and so they overthrew that. So France suffered its second revolution in 1848, and they created what becomes known as the Third Republic. And so this Third Republic has universal male suffrage, as we see here, but the Republic, or I'm sorry, Second Republic, rather, the Second Republic doesn't last too long. Again, Louis' nephew comes in, or I'm sorry, Napoleon's nephew comes in. But the revolution begins in France in 1848, overthrowing Louis Napoleon. It then spreads to Austria. Austria is what we'll call a multinational or multi-ethnic state. They have a huge group of people that they govern within their country. And what they do is there are revolutions specifically by the Hungarians and a guy named Lajos Kossuth. They also don't work. They are put down by Metternich. But they do wind up in Metternich resigning from government. In what we'll call Germany, that central European country where most people speak some sort of Germanic language, remember, the Congress of Vienna created the German Confederation, which was a collection of 38 independent German countries, quote unquote. And the biggest are Prussia and Austria. those German countries decide to say, hey, let's all get together, and they elect and they meet at something called the Frankfurt Assembly, but it doesn't work out. Italy also sees some independence movements. There are countries that are parts of Italy, again, that are divided up, just as the rest of Europe, particularly Germany, are, and they revolt against their Austrian rulers. Once again, we see that that doesn't work out so well for them. Okay, so there are revolutions throughout Europe, but the end result on all of them is that they are all defeated, and that they all wind up in a return to conservative power. Now, France is kind of the one exception to this on continental Europe, in that France ends up with a new government, but they simply return to the French Empire, and Louis Napoleon claims his title as Napoleon III, the French emperor. So there is one significant exception that we have to talk about, and that's the British Isles. Great Britain, the United Kingdom, does feel the push of these liberal reforms, but instead of fighting it and going against it completely, they allow people to have more of a say in government in their own. They expand parliamentary government, and to those people, they allow more of a say in the House of Commons to the average, what we'll call the average commoner. And so that's an important thing to note, is that these revolutions do not take place in Britain, and Britain is able to successfully avoid the revolutions of 1848. Also important to note is that Great Britain has a longer history of democracy, or rule by the people, even if it's just a little bit more say, than those in Europe. And so those countries in Europe really struggle with that. All right, have a good evening.